Hello and welcome back to the channel. You're watching Rocket Coffin Studios, and today I'm going to show you how I built this. This is the Covenant carbine as it appears in the Halo video game series. Now I built mine off of a Nerf Alpha Hawk. Whenever I do a Nerf mod, the question people always ask is it still functional? Well, let me show you. Our cylinder still extends. We are still fully functional. Now, I have a great build video here to show you, and I will ask that if you want to leave a comment and let me know what you think of the build video. This was a lot of work. I had somewhere around 12 hours of footage that I had to edit, and obviously I didn't want a 12-hour or even a 1-hour video. So I tried to condense it down as much as possible. And that meant fast forwarding and speeding up a lot of sections. So please let me know if the video is a little bit too fast or if it's just right. So without further ado and adoing any further, let's get into the video. So like I mentioned previously, I am using a Nerf Alpha Hawk as my base. And I sketch out on a large sheet of construction paper what the design for the Covenant carbine is going to look like. Around this point, I noticed that the bolt on one side was getting in the way, so I went ahead and cut the bolt off because I really just need a bolt on one side to be able to operate it. After sketching out the design, I go ahead and cut out the pieces. These will serve as the templates that we're going to use to make our foam pieces in order to build the body of the carbine. Well, not really the body is already there. This is the extensions of the body to give us the correct shape. I noticed that the template was a little short, so I cut out another piece, and using some good old-fashioned duct tape, I extended the template to give us the correct size. Now I needed to cut some of the barrel off, so I use a Dremel tool with a cutting wheel. And you'll notice I did put on safety glasses. I take my eyes very seriously. And I am using 10mm foam floor mats. These are very cheap. You can get them at Harbor Freight for about $10 a pack. I trace out all the pieces of the template. I did go ahead and cut the template in half just so I wouldn't have to use up so much foam. And I use a mix of an X-Acto knife and a box cutter style snap razor to cut out my pieces. Now, after cutting the pieces out, I want them to be one full-size piece. So I take some contact cement, put that on the edges so we can glue it back together. I use a heat gun to speed up the drying process for the contact cement, and then glue those pieces back together. I then use contact cement on the back side of the pieces. This will allow us to put both pieces together into one larger, thicker piece. Again, using the heat gun to speed up the drying process. And now we can begin putting these pieces together. It's always important with contact cement to really press down on the parts. It takes about 25 pounds per square inch in order to make contact cement work. I'm using hot glue to attach these pieces to the body, which I know some people will believe is sacrilegious because hot glue doesn't hold. However, the hot glue that I use is Surebonder brand wood glue. It is designed to stick wood together, so it works really well with foam and plastic and things like that. Now I'm cutting out the two pieces of foam that we're going to glue together in order to build the top half of our Covenant carbine. This time we're going to try something different. This is Gorilla Glue spray contact cement. It works pretty much the same as regular contact cement. You use a heat gun to speed it up, and you put a lot of pressure on it to make the part stick. It's a little messy, so it's not my preferred choice, but it gets the job done. Now after hot gluing the pieces together, I move back to the templates to build another part that we're going to put on the bottom to sort of bulk up the bottom half. Now I'm going to use a technique where I cut at an angle in order to get a sort of curved edge on the piece. It's a little difficult to do, but the result is really good. Now we attach that piece back to the carbine, and we're going to need to make the back half of that same piece. Follow the same process, trace it, cut it out, and then do the angle cuts to get that nice curvature. Now, after doing the angle cuts, I use the spray adhesive again so that we can attach this piece to the blaster. Now we're going to move on to the templates for the top half. Again, I need to bulk it up some more, so we make another piece for that. And this is kind of going to be the trend of the video, is make a template, trace it, cut the piece out of foam, and then do the angle cuts on it, because the carbine is a very curved sort of shape. And using spray adhesive again. And after attaching the top pieces to the blaster, we move on to the barrel. I'm using a random piece of PVC pipe, and after I take some measurements, I prototype out a template for the piece that will go on top of the barrel. Now, I will also be making a second piece around the same measurements, but I'm going to cut it in half. And that piece will serve to make the parts that go on the sides and the bottom of the barrel. So it has to be a little bit longer. I cut those strips down, and then I go ahead and glue the barrel in place. With the barrel glued in place, we can add on the side pieces. And after cutting it to length, we can add on the bottom piece. Now it is time to add the top piece to the barrel. I'm switching over to SKS Props brand HD foam. This is the 6mm version, and this is what we're going to make the actual sides of the barrel out of. I sort of misspoke earlier. The pieces that we've added to the side are really more of a riser, so that the sides and the top will be about the same distance away from the barrel itself. And then this piece is going to go on the sides and make the actual side of the barrel. Using spray adhesive again, I go ahead and attach that. And now we're going to move on to a quick little extra piece I wanted to do. It was just kind of bothering me how the transition wasn't very good from the foam to the blaster. So I cut out a thin angled strip and glued it on to make that transition a little prettier. I wanted another small piece, again, to help with the transition from the added parts to the blaster. So this piece goes underneath the barrel. I cut it to length, and with it at the appropriate size, I go ahead and do an angle cut on it as well. And with that piece properly angled, it is time to add it to the blaster. Again, using hot glue. Now we're moving on to a piece that's going to go on the top of the blaster. This is a sort of riser for the barrel that's going to be triangular in shape. So I cut out a big rectangle. I fold the rectangle in half, and then using a ruler, I get the angle that I want. By folding it in half, I only have to cut it once, and when I unfold it, we have a nice triangular trapezoidal sort of shape. I trace and cut that out of foam, and of course do another angle cut on it. And it doesn't quite fit, so we have to trim a little bit of it away so that it will butt up against the blaster correctly. Now we go ahead and hot glue it in place. Now I also add another strip of foam to the top to act as a riser for the barrel. And now we're going to make the second level of the triangular shape. I adjust the template because by doing the angle cuts, we reduce the surface area on top of the shape. So the piece that goes on top is going to be a little bit smaller. Now we cut that out. Angle cuts again. It is going to be a lot of angle cuts in this video. And I hot glue that on there, and we have a nice riser. I go ahead and do some detailing on the blaster, and then I start prototyping out a piece that is going to go on the side of the blaster. This is just a small piece, but I felt like it would look a little bit better with it on there. And there's also going to be a piece that sits on top of it, so I use the same template and prototype that piece out. I cut it at a little bit of an angle and also do the angle cuts on the back. And we hot glue it into place. And using a marker, I mark out all the spots that we are going to use a soldering iron on later. And I prototype another piece, which is going to go on top of that smaller piece we did earlier. We cut it out, make sure that it fits, and we go ahead and glue it in place. Now next up, I'm going to be using a Dremel tool to smooth out the edges and make the cuts a little more curved and help really give us that nice smooth shape that the carbine has. I'm using an 80 grit sanding drum on my Dremel, and I do this to the top, bottom, and sides of the blaster that have foam attached to them. With all the sanding out of the way, it's time to move on to the soldering iron. I start by adding the holes into the barrel, and then move on to the dots on the side of the barrel, and these lines that go underneath, as well as all these little detail lines that I had drawn out earlier. And with all the soldering out of the way, we switch back to the Dremel. I am using a cone-shaped sanding drum, and I go through and smooth out all the parts that we just did with the soldering iron. Now, just to be aware, I say Dremel, but what I'm using is a Chicago electric rotary tool from Harbor Freight. I use Dremel interchangeably with rotary tool the way people use Kleenex and tissue paper interchangeably. However, a real Dremel is much more expensive. I paid like 20 bucks for my rotary tool from Harbor Freight. I now move on to this little detail piece, which is going to go sort of where the magazine would on a traditional firearm. We cut it out of 6mm thin foam, and again, we do, you guessed it, angle cuts, which are a little harder on this piece because it's not fully connected. But it still comes out fine, and go ahead and hot glue it into place. With that done, I switch back to the rotary tool, and I'm using a circular sanding drum to make the holes that I did with the soldering iron a little bit bigger. I'm then going to use the Dremel again, or rotary tool again, to make some space for this bottle cap that we're going to put up at the top here. And the bottle cap I'm using is just a random medicine bottle lid, and I'm going to put another medicine bottle lid on top of it, and we go ahead and hot glue both of them together, and it looks pretty good. Now I'm using Alex Fast Dry caulking, This is going to go in between all the little cracks and seams between the foam pieces and sort of help smooth them out, as well as add a little bit of a protective layer on top of the foam. And once all of the caulking has dried, we can move on to paint. Whenever I do something in the foam, I always use a liquid rubber spray paint of some sort. Usually I use Plastidip. This time I tried out Rust-Oleum Leak Seal, and it worked fine. It wasn't quite as cheap, but it worked. I'm using Flat Red Primer from Rust-Oleum. It's my preferred primer. With the body primed, we can move on to color. I'm using Plastidip from their Muscle Car line. This is a metallic purple, which will serve as the main color for our Covenant carbine. Now onto regular paint, I'm using Apple Barrel. Dark blue gray is the color, and this will serve sort of as the base color for the metallic silver that we're going to put on in just a moment. With our base coat of gray out of the way, we can move on to silver. I'm going to be using Folk Art Metallic Gunmetal Gray. This is a really nice color that we're going to do a little bit of work to it to change it, but it's a really good base color by itself. The main two things we'll be doing are a black wash using Apple Barrel Black, which is where we water down the paint, slather it all over the blaster, and then wipe it away with a paper towel. This serves to get black into the recesses of the blaster and highlight the details of it, while also tinting the gray to a slightly darker shade. Now to add some highlights, we're using Folk Art Silver Sterling and dry brushing it over top of our black washed gunmetal gray. After this, we're going to move on to some green details. We are using Apple Barrel Leaf Green, and aside from the two strips on the piece that we added with foam, I'm kind of just picking some spots on the blaster to add green details to. With the green out of the way, we are going to add some purple into all those little areas that I carved into the foam. The purple we're using is Folk Art Perfect Purple, and I'm just going to go ahead and add that on all those little sections that we carved in earlier. Now with the purple detailing done, we are going to move back to the green, and using Lime Sherbet from Apple Barrel, I'm going to add some highlights into the green. This is trying to simulate that sort of a green glowing effect that you see on plasma weapons in the Halo games. With the second shade of green done, we're going to move on to a really cool color. This is Folk Art Dragonfly Glaze, Violet Blue-Green Shift. I'm painting this over all of the purple sections, and it doesn't show up so well on camera, but you can kind of see that effect when I move it and the light hits it. It adds a little sparkle pattern. Now I'm using the gunmetal gray to go in and try and add some separation to this sort of a vent piece up here. I wanted to get a little more of a highlight on the green, so I mixed in some white with our Lime Sherbet green and add that into the center of all of our green highlights. With our third shade of green done, it's time to add a fourth shade. This is Folk Art Metallic Christmas Green, and I'm adding it along all the edges to again try to simulate this plasma glow effect. It didn't turn out quite as good as I was hoping, but we're here now, so we are going to run with it. Now next up, I'm going to take a drill and bore out all of the chambers on the cylinder. They have these little plastic bits inside of them that help hold the darts in place, but I have some lights that I want to stick inside of the chamber. These are very cool, cheap little green lights that are about the size of a 9mm bullet. I got them off of Amazon in a 20 pack for something like $10, and the effect that they produce is pretty dang cool. Now, to test out the lighting effect, I turned out some of the lights so we could really see how much this thing glows, and it's got a pretty good glow to it. So now, as we're approaching the end of the video, we're coming up on my personal favorite part, the screen test, where I put on a costume and see how the blaster would look with the costume. Now in this case, it's a Halo blaster, so guess what? I built an ODST costume for this very video. Well, not the entire costume. I built the helmet, the chest, the shoulders, and the belt. I didn't have time to do anything else for it, but nonetheless, I think putting it all together, it looks pretty damn good. So if you've stuck with me up to this point, I thank you, and I hope to see you in the next one.